right? After this, the next year, by the time you get to the lands, you have the now infamous, well, now legendary, s1mple. s1mple actually joined your team. Even though people know that detail, dude, they don't know how crazy that is. Because even though, I guess later, especially in NA, like it actually became a thing you could have imports. Your team had your Kindar recently, like Cirque was in NRG. Like eventually it didn't become that weird. But at the time, I always said, this is actually why, because me and Hiko were two of the people like brainstorming, like who could you get? And I remember some of the names before, we were telling like maybe that Oscar guy from Czech Republic, you know, we were going through them all. What we realized is because at the time there wasn't insane money in CS, no good European player would come. Because it's not like League of Legends. Like you get to live at home if you're in Europe. So they all just wanted to stay there, I'm afraid. No one wanted to come and like live most of the year in NA. So basically you'd have to get someone like Oscar was a bit older and he wasn't in top team. So you could maybe have him. And then the angle on s1mple was this. Like, look, everyone had heard in the scene like he's mad toxic and he's really rude or whatever. He'd basically been already kicked out of the team. He's by far the best in that flip side team. So like it kind of said it all. But that's what I said to Hiko. Like, that's the thing though. Logically, that's the only reason you'll be able to get him though, because he hasn't got a team. Like essentially he has to join, and basically he did, and he came over, and people might remember almost immediately when he arrived he had that like drama in fucking ESEA with all the Brazilians and stuff, and it's like if people don't know, this was like prime s1mple. This wasn't like later he sort of toned it down. I'm sure when he got teammates he liked it, got better, but I've heard this was the era where people are going to know that the results at the majors are awesome, you know, and this at the Columbus one he could have won. But I've heard behind the scenes, I don't know why I mean say I've heard, but this way, I knew your coach back then, and spoiler, I've even heard some of the like recordings of these scrims. Dude, this guy was fucking wilding. Like, I'm not joking. Like, this is like, he wasn't doing it as a joke as well. Like, if he didn't like how things were going, he would rage, right? And he would just get upset directly at people. Right? I mean, I know it's like a culture clash because your team was pretty chill, but what was this like? Because on the one hand, like, he's fucking obviously he's like cracked at the game, but I've heard it sounded like he was a really hard teammate if you were used to having like a chilled out vibe in a team.
Yeah, I mean, Sasha was definitely he was so far ahead of everyone else mechanically, and just it's so funny because like even today if we go back and like we watch the scrims for fun just to see like the tilting and all that, you know, with my current or ex Liquid teammates, and it's like Sasha was so far ahead actually macro wise, and he didn't even know it, and mechanically, so like he was also micro and macro so much further ahead than like you would even think back then. Like he had like really good reads and he understood just where the enemies were at like any point in the round. It's actually wild to think about because obviously like back then like he was already becoming the best player in the world, but just slowly, or maybe he was at the time and no one actually knew it until he like got the opportunity to actually show, you know, like at the Columbus final or Columbus major and the Cologne major, for example. But I remember we knew that, obviously everyone knew that he was super talented, and getting him was going to be a huge risk because of his reputation. You know, he's already gotten fined a couple times here and there, said some dumb stuff on stream, and I remember like obviously Hiko had a good relationship with him previously, so that was a huge thing for him and us. So having Hiko on the team kind of balanced it a little bit, but I think him and Eric kind of got into it a little bit because, like I mentioned earlier, like Eric was kind of like the structure kind of person. He would get frustrated. I
heard he wasn't a fan of a dread.
Not at all. Yeah. So like they definitely had their arguments back and forth, and it was just some practices were just awful to play. They were miserable because we had two people who were just getting mad at each other, and it was like super counterproductive. And you know,
it was even implied, dude, before even the major, like you might just get kicked out. Like maybe we have to just boot this guy out.
Yeah, it was really bad, to be honest, and like no one really knows that, as like the fans know, so they just kind of see from the outside. But it was really hard to play. But then again, like s1mple is like just dropping 30s every scrim, so it's like, what do we do?
Yes. Right. Obviously, then the weird thing was you went to that first qualifier, and people forget this. They maybe remember that thing of s1mple crying at the end, but they don't know why he cried. He cried because you guys had like fucked this qualifier up, and then you were playing actually that Oscar Hellraiser's team, and they were going fucking ham on like the third map, and you guys qualified by literally like the smallest margin ever. And actually, s1mple didn't play great in this game. This wasn't one of his better games, and so if people don't know, the reason he cried is because essentially, like you're saying, if people don't know, I get why he was almost like a spoiled kid in the game. game, he actually could just like do anything he wanted. And so because this was like the one game ever where basically he got carried by his team and they got him to the major. And if people don't know, he'd been even banned from like some of the majors that ESL won. So he'd like only played, I think, DreamHack Winter. So in this scenario, like it was actually kind of like he saw like a bit of growth from us. Do you remember this insane qualification last second where it looked like you were going to blow it and then you just got through?
Yeah, it was super intense. I remember him crying too on the interview, and he was such a young kid. And it's like he's like, it's the first time I got carried, so it was almost like a sense of like humbleness, like humbling himself. That he's like, all right, these guys like actually are here for me, and I'm not just there for them. That kind of makes sense. Because obviously, like previously, he just was playing super well with us, and he had a lot of freedom within our system and within our team to just do whatever he wanted. Kind of, we would just kind of play around it. So whenever he wasn't having that insane game, which he usually, like, you know, back then, like he wouldn't really have those off games. He would be pretty consistently top fragging, or like at least a little bit towards the top. I remember he was playing like pretty bad. I don't know if it was like a pressure thing or something, because he maybe saw Oscar as like a rival, or just the CIS team as a rival. So yeah, I remember it was a really cool moment. It was super sweet looking back, and it was cool to kind of see him like being humbled a little bit back then.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.